This is the second presentation in the series where we're looking at this puzzling book, The Song of Songs. That phrase could mean the greatest song, or it could mean a set of songs. Perhaps both are true. And when we look at this book, this compilation of love poems, it's a set of erotic love poems. And you say to yourself, what's its place in the Bible? It's simply a celebration of sexual love. Part of being a human being, part of our nature, part of our existence, an important element in life. Yes, it's a set of songs, and they don't necessarily follow any cold logical order. They're poetry. They're not historical. You can't identify the people with anybody in history. It doesn't tell a story. It doesn't seek to. It paints a series of pictures, and we have to interpret it that way as poetry. The language used, a celebration of sexual love. And if we look at the language, we can see it's highly metaphorical. It paints vivid word pictures. It's very sensual. And sometimes it's erotic. We don't always understand that and grasp it right away in the English. In the English language, we have all sorts of words and circumlocutions and ways to get round descriptions of the sexual parts of men and women. It's exactly the same in the language in which these poems were written. We have to understand it and to see this as a celebration of sexual love. And it's open and up front. In these poems there's a man, a woman, and wider society. But the woman comes first. She plays a much bigger role in this set of poems. You can't identify them with anyone specific. In the books, in the songs, she's a dominant figure. And we're left with a very clear picture of someone who's virtuous, who's assertive, who's positive. A very strong, clear picture, and that in no way takes away from the strength of the man either. But it paints a vivid picture of relationships of a sexual nature. Now we can do three things with this book. That, tragically, is what the Christian world has tended to do, and is still doing. We sometimes wonder why the book is there. We feel a bit embarrassed and push it aside. We try to allegorize it and interpret it away. We rip verses out of context, but we largely ignore it. And this is part of the simple historical fact that the people of God, we historically have failed to engage with sexual issues. And I'm using the word engage. Sometimes we've set up rules. Sometimes we've punished people for things that we don't approve of. Sometimes we've been critical, but we haven't engaged with the simple fact that human beings are made as sexual beings. And it's part of an integral part of our lives. And we've just ignored it, and we still are doing that. One of the ways historically that we've done this is to say, well, it can't possibly be a book about sexual issues, so we've treated it as an allegory. But that's contradicted by every piece of evidence. And today, the vast, vast majority do not take that line. Sadly, it still remains in one or two sections of the Christian community. Because, you see, treating it as an allegory contradicts the actual language, the language of the book. But it also contradicts the way that the New Testament doesn't use it that way. In fact, the New Testament never cites it, never quotes it. People treating an allegory see it as a picture of God's love for his people, his church. Yes, that is taught in the New Testament, and marriage gives us a model for that. But the model of marriage is never sexual love. It's a different word in the language of the New Testament. It's love, meaning putting the agenda of the other first, which is how God treats us, and how partners in a marriage treat each other. So you can't use the book this way, or you can't do it with integrity. And the sad thing is, people are still doing it, using old translations of the Bible and ripping verses out of context and building vast edifices of thought forms on it, which have no substance and no basis, and they're contradicted by the evidence. Let's take it as what it is: a celebration of sexual love. Now, we might balk at that, we might push back, we might say, oh, well, what's its point, what's its place? But you see, that's part of God's wonderful creation. We human beings are animals, yes, but we don't just run on instincts. And there is in our relationships something that's far, far deeper that God has given to us as his species. And it's seen in his fullness in the marriage relationship. It's part of God's wonderful creation. He made us this way. It's part of our lives. Therefore, we've got to engage with it, talk about it, share it, come to terms with it, realize its power and its dangers. That's what this book does. That's the focus of the book. And that's the way we've got to treat it and look at it today and see what great messages it can bring to us, which can help us forward in our understanding of this, that we may make a contribution to wider society in a positive, wholesome and affirmative way. That is true. I just have to ponder it and realize the power of that relationship. The last presentation I drew attention to the great theologian Tremper Longman III, who said this: sexuality is a major aspect of the human experience. And God in his wisdom has spoken through the poet or poets of the song to encourage us as well as warn us about its power in our lives. That's an excellent summary of the significance of this book. He also said that the Song of Songs is part of the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, and he describes wisdom as the application of God's will to the nitty-gritty of life, the real issues, the real problems, the real events of daily living. And this book certainly addresses that. Tragically, that's where we've moved in the West. Sex has become our God. It's become the most important thing of life. We sell things using sex. Sex infiltrates all through our programs seen on television. Sex is wonderful, but it doesn't give us the ultimate meaning and purpose of life. Tragically, this is also true. Historically, it's true, still true today, although there have been wonderful books in recent years which have started to address the issue. We're still seeing it largely as a taboo subject. Sometimes celibacy is elevated. That's not biblical. There's no biblical command that says that to be a priest you've got to be celibate. That's a canon law, that's a church law, that's a human law. That's not biblical. But if you suppress the natural way we human beings are made, then that suppression will re-erupt in some other way, often to the hurt of other people. And sometimes tragically we see that. But the big problem is this: we've got a massive polarization. We're shouting at each other. We're not engaging with each other over the issue. That's where the Song of Songs has its place. Somehow, one of the big issues that the Christian people of the West have got to face is to break that polarization and to stop shouting criticism at the wider world, while the wider world shouts at us that we're bigots. We've got to come to a more balanced point, and we've got to engage with the issue. That is simply a fact. Tragically, and that's always been true, because of their importance and their power, they can be abused. Wonderful though they may be, they don't hold the answer to life's deepest meanings. If we think they do, that's living in the world of fairy tales, living happily ever after. So often young couples come to marriage with expectations that are not realistic. We, the people of God, have got to engage with the issue, be realistic, share it, come out in the open. And we've got to develop that picture. Mutual, exclusive between a couple, total commitment, and the word is beautiful. So often we've left it as the word of in a dark corner, dirty, sleeping around with anybody, pleasure, exploiting others and paying for it. This book has something to say to us, the people of God, and to wider society. That's the implicit strong message running throughout this book. I'm going to pick up just one or two passages that illustrate it. The woman speaking. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. Pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Your name is like perfume poured out. No wonder the young women love you. All the women thought he was wonderful. And then she goes on, take me away with you. Let us hurry. Let the king bring me into his chambers. The desire to be alone, the desire for intimacy. Later she goes on, while the king was at his table, my perfume spread its fragrance. My beloved is to me a sachet of myrrh, resting between my breasts. They're in close embrace. And we've got to watch. If we rip verses out of context, we can come up with all sorts of meanings. If you look through the book, she describes her man as king, but she also describes him as shepherd and as beloved. This has nothing to do with Solomon. In the same way as a woman can describe the man she loves with all sorts of titles and descriptions, her prince, her rock, her beloved. It's the kind of language she uses. It's poetic. Then he comes back. I liken you, my darling, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariot horses. Your cheeks are beautiful with earrings, your neck with strings of jewels. We will make you earrings of gold studded with silver. All the chariot horses that Pharaoh used were always male. Put in a mare, a female horse, amongst them, you can imagine what all these male horses would be doing, competing and battling for her. He sees her as simply beautiful, highly attractive, and therefore affecting men all around. It's a danger. But he wants to adorn her more and more. And he goes on to say later, "You have stolen my heart. My sister, my bride, you have stolen my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace." He's totally overwhelmed with his love and desire for her. Again, if you look throughout the poems, you can find he describes his woman as darling, my bride and sister, in one place, my beautiful one. Again, these are the kind of phrases in the language of the time that were used, and we have our equivalents today, my princess. Sexual desire is natural and good, and it's pictured here from both sides. He goes on, "How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful, your eyes are doves." She replies, "How handsome you are, my beloved, and oh, how charming. And our bed is verdant, the beams of our house are cedars, our rafters are firs." The woman is expressing her love for him. He's expressing his love for her. And the picture here is that they're sitting talking together, or perhaps lying in woodland with cedar trees above them, fir trees around them, or relaxing, looking into each other's eyes and just celebrating the beauty that they see in the other. Let's celebrate this. God made us that way. That is always true. They've gone into the woodland on their own. They just want to be alone together, to look at each other and feast on the beauty they see. Now, we read this in our modern-day 21st century society, and we don't realize just how subversive this kind of book would have been. Here's a set of poems dominated by the woman speaking. More than 50% of the book is the woman speaking. Now, in those days, men were the dominant sex in all societies at that time. Women were very often given in marriage as young teenagers to a man by the choice of their father, with the family's approval. Whether they loved the person was irrelevant. It was their duty to serve that man, to give him pleasure, and to bear many children, which was the future of the family line. Here is a woman allowed to express love, commitment, desire, and an open expression of sexual desire. Okay for a man in the culture of those days. For a woman, this is highly subversive. We fast forward to the days of the Roman Empire. The abuse of sex was everywhere. It has always been so. And women were regarded as property. And in some cultures they still are. They are to bring pleasure to men and to have many children. This runs counter to the culture of the day and the idea that sexual desire could be mutual. Now, we've lost that today, and indeed we've lost that today in so much of our media image. The mutuality of sexual desire In simple terms, there are parts of the male body and parts of the female body that God has simply designed for sexual pleasure. He built us to desire our committed partner. It's part of the way He made us. We should not suppress it. We should not ignore it. We need to engage with it and its dangers. It's part of the rich tapestry of living. So much of this passage has been misinterpreted. I am a rose of Sharon, she says, a lily of the valleys. He replies, like a lily among thorns is my darling among the young women. She goes on, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. We need to look at what that really means, not what our allegorizing of it may mean, which simply cannot be true. She goes on, strengthen me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. Let's look at this a little bit more. Take the first little bit. She's speaking. He's speaking. She comes back. Oh, how often we've taken this I am a rose of Sharon. The simple botanical fact is, roses did not exist in the land of Israel until after Old Testament times. We don't know what that word means. Some modern translations just say, I'm a flower of Sharon, Sharon, a valley which in the springtime could be covered in flowers, common flowers, and the lily was a common flower. They were everywhere. What she's saying is this: the roses didn't exist, the lilies are common. I'm nothing special, she says. There are lots of beautiful flowers around. I'm just one of them. But the man comes back like a lily among thorns, a lily, a common plant. And he's saying, you're infinitely special to me. How that rings true to life. There are many women who don't see themselves as anything special, and they find it amazing that a man falls in love with them and sees them as infinitely special to them. That's wonderful. That's the way God made us. But that's where it leads. The actual language there, the apple tree, his fruit, these are circumlocutions, euphemisms for a desire to be with him, to intimacy, leading on to sexual fulfillment. She wants to be so close to him, to give herself to him. That is a natural thing. We've got to learn its power and learn its dangers. Banqueting hall. This is a way of saying he's intoxicated with love for her. It's a play on words. He's kind of drunk. He's almost irrational, head over heels in love with her. That's realistic. And what that last line is saying is, he's marked her out as his own. Now that may have been the marriage ceremony, or it may have been the way she is with him in the public place. And he is demonstrating his care and respect for her, elevating her in a society where women were not elevated normally in that way. What a beautiful and wonderful picture, but it's true. She goes on. That's true, for I am faint with love. In the same way as he is intoxicated with love for her, she feels weak with her love for him. It's overwhelmed them both. And they're in deep embrace, the physical expression of that love. And then suddenly she jolts back. Strong advice to women, daughters of Jerusalem. Not some specific people, women in general. Young girls in particular. Be careful, be careful, be careful. It's too easy to arouse a man. Now the words translated arouse or awaken there, it's the same word in two different forms in the original language. And that's the way in that language of making it very, very strong. There are real dangers here, and we in the people of God, we've got to engage with this issue. The power of young girls to arouse young men is enormous, dangerous. We've got to be careful. There's a kind of summary. Again, depending on the insights from Tremper Longman III. What this young girl who's found love, who's found commitment, who's found her man, whose life is fulfilled with him, she's saying to the younger women around, do not seek to arouse this kind of demanding love. It means total commitment. So don't arouse it until the right moment. If you like, love is not a passing emotion just to satisfy yourself. For a woman to make a sense of power over men that she can stir them up, or a man that's got power over a woman because he can express himself with her in bed. It's not a passing emotion. It can be described, sexual love, as a demanding and exhausting relationship. There's a very deep warning. And within the people of God, we've got to engage with that issue, with the ongoing development of education. It's more difficult for young men and young women to come together in marriage and commitment till they're a bit older. But they still have the driving power of the desire for sexual commitment. We, the people of God, have got to engage with that issue, discuss it, come out into the open with it. This song is a celebration of sexual love, its power, and the warnings about it could be abused. Here is a message in this book which can break down the polarization between our society, which has made sex a god with no consequences. And we have not engaged with the issue amongst the people of God. The book celebrates that simple truth seen from the perspective of the woman predominantly. In the society of that day, where men were the ones that mattered, and what they wanted was what counted. This rights the balance. It's both ways. But this drive, that's natural. And the way we've altered society, we've got to address that issue and find ways round it. The ways of our modern societies are just do what you want as long as the other person's willing. But there are consequences for that kind of behaviour. And our society's social structures and health services are now paying the penalty, the cost, which we all bear for irresponsibility. But we've got to address this powerful drive. It's there. It's God-given. It's wonderful. But that's the message of this young lady who'd found that commitment. The message to the young teenage girls around. Be careful. With these words ringing in our ears, we've just touched the surface of this remarkable book. In the next presentation, we're going to look at more themes which can be developed from the Song of Songs.